In this video, we're going to be talking about the tasty soup at the end of hot pot that happens when you put Asian Americans, mental health, faith, and the model minority all together. Have you ever heard of what it means to be the model minority? Do you believe it's true? Does it deserve to be a stereotype? Or do you think it's a myth? We're going to define what the idea of model minority means and show you how it impacted our parents' generation and how it begins to impact us coming up. I had a feeling a bunch of families had hot pot. That's what my family had. If you had hot pot for Thanksgiving, give the video a thumbs up. And if you had something else, I want to know what everyone had to eat for Thanksgiving down in the comments below. I'm Dominic, and Lighthouse is a youth ministry at Austin Chinese Church where we desire for every student to personally experience the light of Christ and for students to shine the light of Christ into your spheres of influence. Just like we know that taking care of our physical health is important and taking care of your spiritual health is important, it is also important to take care of our mental health. This video is the third lesson on mental health and self-care in light of learning how we can address our faith and mental health in 2020. We're so close to getting 100 subscribers, and I know that there are a bunch of you that aren't subscribed to the Lighthouse channel but are watching the lessons. So smash the subscribe button right now, and our lessons on Fridays and Sundays will be there when you open it. And because we can't fit this all in one lesson today, we've split this up into two parts. In part 2 next week, we'll talk about how the concept of the model minority has impacted Asian Americans in general, and what role the idea of the model minority affects our mental health and our identity as God's children. The model minority can be defined as a stereotype that Asian Americans are fundamentally smart at an elite level, hardworking, high-achieving, self-reliant, musically gifted, docile, non-threatening individuals, particularly in contrast to the other minorities in America. Now, let's be honest. When I think about most of you, most of these descriptions fit many of you. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not bad that these qualities may describe you. What makes the model minority a myth is the stereotype, the assumption that because you are Asian American, you must be smart, hardworking, high-achieving, self-reliant, musically gifted, docile, and non-threatening. That you must get into an elite college. That you're a loser if you're not ranked in the top 10 in your class. Over the years, I've had the privilege to attend the graduations of numerous Lighthouse grads who are valedictorians, ranked top 10, admitted into prestigious universities and programs at some of the best institutions in the country and the world. Last year's seniors, who are freshmen in college now, 60% of them went to a top 50 US News and World Report school. And of those, as a class, their school's average rank was 26. Absolutely incredible. Part of why I'm your youth pastor is because I grew up just like you. My dad expected me to earn a graduate degree, and my aspirations in middle school and high school were to be an architect, a dentist, and a financial analyst. He expected my college degree lead directly to a professional job. And when I was in middle and high school, I bought into the model minority myth, hook, line, and sinker. Full stop. Not only did my dad have these expectations on me, all my friends' parents had these expectations for their children, and I absorbed these expectations for myself. The term model minority appears to have been first used in a 1960s New York Times article about Japanese Americans, and over the years, its use has tended to refer to the children of immigrants, of East Asians. So generally, we're talking about those who are Japanese, Korean, and Chinese, and I use Chinese in the broadest set of the terms, and who immigrated to America with at least a college education, which we see the rise of from the Immigration Act of 1965. And those with a college education tend to value their education and encourage their children to also seek a college education. 60% of the American population does not have a college degree. I know it's very likely that you don't know anyone in your social circles who aren't aiming to go to college. But that's the reality for the majority of Americans. And the media has used the idea of the model minority as a way to elevate Asian Americans over other minorities for their educational achievement, but simultaneously creating a limit on Asian Americans. What's cynical about the model minority stereotype is that it is just good enough to get your foot in the door, but it defines, limits, and reduces you to merely educational achievement. So, what happens when you're done with school and that first job? After your first job, unless your education matches your job very closely or is needed to get certifications, most hiring situations don't care much where or what you studied. This was the cover from August 1987. Now, I know most of you don't read magazines, let alone Time magazine, so let me transport you back. Time magazine was arguably one of the most read and well-respected magazines back in the 80s. So for this to make the cover of Time and to be the lead article was a massive, massive deal. Reading the article, The New Whiz Kids, Why Asian Americans Are Doing So Well and What It Cost Them, is like reading an article about Asian parents today and students today. It just needs an updated photo and some stats. To be honest, 30 years later, not much has changed. But articles like this one, on the one hand, celebrates and promotes the success of Asian American students, which is good, but on the other hand, perpetuates the stereotype that all Asian Americans are going to be accomplished enough to do everything needed to get into the great colleges. Here's a quote from the article. By almost every educational gauge, young Asian Americans are soaring. They spend more time on their homework, a researcher at the U.S. Department of Education found, take more advanced high school courses, and graduate with more credits than other American students. A high percentage of these young people complete high school and finish college more than do white American students. For Lighthouse, this is all just standard stuff, right? The challenge is when the air you breathe, the water you swim in, is the culture or the expectations. It's difficult to see the pitfalls of what's flawed about the way things are. The Sue dynasty, back in the early 680s, originated the idea of imperial civil service exams for governmental positions. And over time, amongst the different dynasties, the examinations have evolved, but that's not the important part. The key part is that as a cultural value, the idea that education as the path for career success and socioeconomic mobility is deeply ingrained in many of us for the last 1400 years. And in my experience, regardless of the socioeconomic class that the family is from, virtually everyone believes that education is the critical key for social mobility. You may be familiar with the modern equivalent, the Gaokao exams that are distributed every June in China that practically determine the fate of that student and his or her family from that moment on. It's been called the most pressure-packed examination in the world. Perform well, and admission to elite universities can change and redefine a family's trajectory. Perform poorly, and well, your fate is sealed. Once you graduate from your amazing university, no one can take your degree from you. For Asian parents, educational achievement is the focus for their child because they want you to have security and stability. When I was in middle school, my dad had me join the Boy Scouts, not because he wanted me to learn about nature, service, or survival skills. No. He wanted me to join because it would look good on my private school, high school applications. Because that's what those schools were looking for from their applicants. Maybe your parents or your friends' parents have had your friends do things like this. Now, even if your parent or parents are Christians, it doesn't mean it cannot be hard, difficult to separate cultural values from Christian values. The older generation sacrificed themselves to give their children the opportunity to chase the American dream. This excerpt is the narrative of the older generation, right? Daniel Pack, an 18-year-old from Dallas, entering Harvard next month, shines in everything he does from math to violin. His brother Tony, 20, is studying physics at MIT. Their parents had such colleges in mind when they moved to the US in 1970. The boy's father gave up his career as a professor of German literature in South Korea. Unable to get an academic position in the US, he eventually found work as a house painter. With many of our parents being immigrants, they left home, they left family behind, came to a land where they knew no one, couldn't speak a word, and barely had any money. and they had to make it work for themselves, and the weight of their family name and their reputation was on the line, and they had to make it work for their future generation. I remember as a kid, I would ask my parents for stuff, and they would always say no. They refused to buy me a gaming console because it would distract me from my studies. But a computer, that's educational. I can still remember the times my dad would say, if it's educational, then yes, I'll get it for you. Look, I get it. I was cleaning out my parents' garage a few years ago, and I found a Kumon application when I was in the 2nd grade. And the question that asked parents why they want to sign up their child for Kumon, you know what my dad wrote? To prepare me for the SATs. Yep, SATs on the record in the 2nd grade. And just for context, in California, there's no guaranteed admission to an in-state school based on your class rank to get into a UC Berkeley or a UCLA. To help me boost my SATs, my parents enrolled me in a Korean SAT program over the summer going into my junior year called boot camp. 9 to 5, 5 days a week, and sometimes weekends. Like boot camp, it was intense. That summer, my dad shortened his work hours and would drive through LA traffic to get me there. If you've been to LA, you know how bad LA traffic can be. Now, the drive one way from our home was easily 30 to 40 minutes. He'd drop me off, drive to work, skip lunch, leave work early, drive back to pick me up, then drive back home. He easily spent 3 hours a day that summer driving just to get me to the best SAT program he could find for me. That's the drive, the determination, and the sacrifice our parents have to give us the opportunity to accomplish our educational aspirations. For many of us, our parents came to America so that we could live a better life than they did. We share these stories because the reality is that many of our parents have high educational expectations for us. Have you ever studied to a test? Not so you could learn, but you could perform well on your test? Look, it totally makes sense. I know I have, and I bet you probably have too. But the challenge of our parents' expectations of our academic achievement and the model minority myth is that many of them raise us to perform well on the test, getting into a great college, so that you can get into a great graduate program or secure a high-paying job. Again, that's not a bad thing. Getting into a great college isn't the only thing for you to accomplish before you leave home. Building your relationships with your parents, siblings, friends at Lighthouse, friends at school, these are all important as well. Developing yourself socially and emotionally are important. Growing in your faith to be deepened, resilient, and personal is also absolutely vital. We'll discuss more problems with the model minority stereotype next week, but I want to address a few issues today. First of all, it ignores the simple and obvious fact that God made us different and unique, and we possess different strengths and weaknesses. I'm terrible at anything STEM related. I'm terrible with computers. I couldn't program anything if my life depended on it. I've met plenty of Asian parents who believe so strongly in their child's abilities, as well as a fear that an admission of mental health issues is a negative reflection of their parenting, that they discredit and don't even believe in mental health. For many, the pressure and expectations are so great to bring honor and success to yourself and your family that coming up short by their own definition causes many to consider suicide and disproportionately many complete suicide. It boils down to the pressure and expectations. And lastly, as Christians, we recognize that one's worth and identity being tied up in academic and career success is a road to nowhere. If you're a Christian, you need to own the fact that your identity and worth are not tied up in your achievements, but in what Jesus accomplished on the cross. Of course, we affirm that you ought to do your best academically as a student, but by no means is your worth determined by how well you do on a test. In that regard, we reject our cultural customs and history. If you're not a Christian, then the good news for you is that your identity, your worth, you need to know that they don't have to be defined by going to an elite college, the graduate program you attend, and the job that you have. I get that our parents just want the best for us, and the world is a competitive place. So it's easy for them to focus and give the message that they just care about your achievements. But I bet if you spoke to most parents, they wouldn't actually define you by your achievements. If you want to have an identity and worth to be defined by something else, then I'd encourage you to learn more about Jesus and what the Christian faith can offer you. For now, we'll stop here and let you discuss more in your small group, but don't click away just yet. Stay and watch the rest of the video with us. Here's some discussion questions I'd love for you to discuss. In your own words, how would you define the idea of model minority? To what degree have your parents bought into the idea of being a model minority? To what degree have you bought into the idea of being a model minority yourself? Do your parents view mental health as legitimate or fake, and why? What are other problems with the model minority myth or stereotype? What are your parents' expectations for your academics and career? The weekend after classes are over for you, we won't be meeting for Lighthouse. And on Sunday the 20th, we'll have a church-wide Christmas service that starts at 10 a.m. Just follow all the normal ways you would normally catch the English worship, but instead do it at 10. Thank you for spending time with me today to consider how the model minority myth affects our community and possibly you personally. I hope and pray that you'll find your small group a safe space to share about the pressures and expectations you feel from your parents and culture. We hope you find time to encourage and bless one another. We want you to know the counselors and I are praying for you, praying for your spiritual health, your mental health, your emotional health, and your physical health. We miss you all. If you want to catch up on our series, click on the mental health playlist, and we'll see you in the next video.